Welcome to the special edition of the I-24 News Desk. I'm Batia Leventhal coming to you live from Tel Aviv. 13 hours of quiet and then at 11 a.m. local time, both the tense calm and hopes of a ceasefire were shattered. A volley of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip towards the southern communities of Israel. A short while later, long-range projectiles were also launched toward areas south of Jerusalem, setting off sirens in the Etzion settlement block and Beit Shemesh for the first time since the violence erupted. Many of the short-range rockets were down by the Iron Dome air defense system or landed in open areas. The medium-range David Sling air defense system, however, made a second-ever successful interception during the rocket attack directed at the Jerusalem area. No injuries were reported in the late morning attacks. Our correspondent Hamdah Salhut is in the southern city of Sderot. Hamdah, first and foremost, what are the updates there? We do believe that rocket sirens have been going off since the late morning, predominantly in the areas and the communities just outside of the Gaza border. What can you tell us?
Batia, good afternoon. It's been about 20 minutes since we've received a red alert for places like Nahal Oz and Adumim. These are just a little bit south of here, but the southern border communities continue to be hammered by the rocket fire coming from Palestinian Islamic Jihad inside of the Strip. Just a few moments ago, Islamic Jihad issuing a statement saying, quote, "A few hours separate us from a major earthquake in the occupied territories, and we swear," sending a warning, a message to Israel that this is not over. Earlier in the day, Islamic Jihad also saying that they will not stop unless Israel stops, and they could go until the flag march, which is next Friday. The flag march falls on Jerusalem Day, and the march starts at Damascus Gate and goes through the Muslim Old Quarter. This is an ultra-nationalistic march. Historically, we've seen a ton of violence there, so it's yet to be seen when there will be a ceasefire. Apparently, those ceasefire talks deteriorating after those rockets were fired to the Jerusalem area. Now, that's about 80 kilometers from the Gaza Strip. The Israeli security apparatus was not really expecting Islamic Jihad's rockets to travel that far, and it was kind of a game changer for where this conflict is heading. But as of now, we can expect more red alerts, more rockets, and more interception by the Iron Domes in the hours to come.
Now, Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid visited the Gaza border earlier today, specifically Netiv Asara, a town that's just south of that border, but also meeting with the heads of the council in the city of Ashkelon for apparently security assessments. How important is it for morale that we do have, whether it's members of the coalition or the opposition, visiting these towns that seem to be in the line of fire?
Well, look, residents in these border communities have been saying this for years, that the leadership needs to be in charge of what comes in and out of the Gaza Strip, referring to the rocket fire. Now, a lot of people voted for this right-wing and religious government to combat things like this, but it's not really going to be up to them. It's up to the militants and the factions inside the Gaza Strip who say they have business to deal with when it comes to the Israelis. So while it might be a boost for morale if political leaders go into these southern communities, it's yet to be seen if their visits will actually mean anything more than just sentiment at this point.
Hamdah Salhut, our correspondent down in the southern city of Sderot, will be checking back in with you later in the day for some more updates. Thank you very much. And with me here in studio is Yaakov Lapin, a military and strategic affairs analyst for both the Jewish News Syndicate and the Miriam Institute. Yaakov, there's mixed reports on targeted assassinations, rockets, ceasefires, operational objectives being reached. Where exactly do we stand here? It doesn't seem like this is any end in sight.
So I think the first thing we should note is that we are in a surprise phase of this escalation, because the general trend was that we would be heading towards a ceasefire. We had a quiet night, and the fact that Palestinian Islamic Jihad fired on the greater Jerusalem area this morning is a surprise. I think that is a sign of their unpredictability, and that leads us to the question of what is causing this. Now, last night, the IDF shared some assessments that the Iranians were putting pressure on Palestinian Islamic Jihad leaders who are not in the Gaza Strip. They are in Damascus, they are in Beirut, safe comfortable, in expensive hotels on the Iranian payroll. And they received pressure from Iran to tell the rocket-firing squads in Gaza to keep going. That's according to the IDF assessments that we heard last night. And that could help explain why right now we are not in a ceasefire as many of us thought we would be by now. So that's one factor to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind here is Hamas. In my opinion, Hamas wants this to end now because any further escalation could draw it in. Hamas has been sitting on the sidelines remarkably for the third time since 2019, since Israel and PIJ went at it directly.
Which is also a surprise, I might add.
It's surprising to many, but Hamas has its interests here, and Hamas's interests are, first of all, I think, to show to the Palestinian street that it is the Palestinian leader and it is the one who can fight Israel the best, not Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they want to show that PIJ is limited. So for a while, this served its interest, but now it's reaching the danger zone because Israel may need to feel the need to put pressure on Hamas, to put pressure on PIJ, to put an end to this. And if Hamas gets drawn into this conflict, we will be in a completely different phase.
Now, you mentioned that Jerusalem was a surprise. So
yes.
let me poke at you a little bit with regards to something. Rockets are being fired at Jerusalem. I'll remind you, at least from the Palestinian side, we're talking about a very holy area for them where it hosts the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Al-Aqsa compounds, Haram al-Sharif.
Yes.
Then why aim rockets at such a holy space, knowing that they may in fact also harm or hit Palestinians that are in East Jerusalem and
Right.
Israeli Arabs?
It's an excellent question, and I think the answer is the same reason that Hamas fired at Jerusalem in 2021, sparking Guardian of the Walls, because it enables these factions to market themselves as the defenders of Jerusalem. We're coming up to Jerusalem Day, to the marches, to a whole new set of tensions that comes up every year, and by firing in Jerusalem's direction, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is trying to copy Hamas's, I call this a marketing strategy, and they're telling the Palestinian street, Jerusalem is, as far as we're concerned, occupied, and we are defending Palestinian interests in Jerusalem by launching these attacks. The risks that are involved, they consider those to be tolerable, just as, we're talking about people who surround themselves with human shields that are often made up of their own families. One of the senior PIJ terrorists who was killed yesterday was in a vehicle with his children, with his 4 children, and he was in an apartment with his children, and at that time the IDF chose not to strike, and then when he dropped them off at an apartment and went to another building, that's when he was struck. So if they're willing to take those kinds of risks with their own children, they're willing to take risks with the safety of Palestinians in Jerusalem.
Let's touch base a little bit on what you mentioned with regards to Iran. We know at least that Iran is funding the PIJ. You mentioned that a lot of its leadership sitting at the moment in Beirut, in Damascus.
Right.
But what we do know is that at the moment there have been over 800 rockets being fired at Israel, an arsenal that is pretty massive when you think about it. These aren't just a handful of rockets. We're talking about almost 1,000 rockets being directed at Israel. How much more funding could Iran be giving, and is this perhaps an eye-opener to Israel in terms of just how much Iran could be behind this?
Well, I think the Israeli defense establishment is well aware of the extent of funding. It's tens of millions of dollars a year that goes to PIJ, and that's not even including the separate budget that Hamas gets, which is bigger. PIJ has thousands of rockets in its arsenal. It has set up, just like Hamas, a sprawling industry to produce these things in Gaza using things like cement, steel, chemicals for the rocket engines, and they've become experts with Iranian know-how. So all of this is very well known to the Israeli defense establishment. I think for the Israeli general population, yes, it's a very painful and stinging reminder that not only is Hamas in the Gaza Strip building its force, building its offensive capabilities, there's another organization right alongside with it doing the same thing.